Hey there guys, Noah here. Welcome back to another Vanguard discussion video. Today, I want to talk about something that I think is very hard to describe in a lot of aspects to people who only play casually, but I want to specifically talk about in this video what I consider problematic card design in Vanguard in particular. And this is going to be something that is become very more apparent in recent days, months, so on and so forth. And it's been kind of a problem, and it's probably the main reason why a lot of people don't touch premium in a lot of aspects. And that is simply because of the some admittedly unfair interactions that tend to come up in premium, either because of combination of old and new cards, or a lot of new cards that just make a certain deck very absolutely broken, to a point where it is insanely difficult to counterplay, assuming you can even do that in the first place. Now, keep in mind, what I consider problematic card design versus what others might consider problematic card design are completely different. So, if you have your own takes on this idea, let me know in the comment section below, and we can get a conversation going. So, let's get started. So, what do I consider problematic card design in a broad sense? So what I consider that is when you introduce new cards into a format that either mesh well with the already pre-existing recent support or relatively older support to make a deck way more overpowered or way more unfair to play against, to a point where it is causing a lot of people to not want to play a certain format. And in this particular instance, to give you an example, Greydora, for example, has become a recent problem because, yes, she was made during a time where multi-attacking was, while having a floodgate effect wasn't necessarily too much of a problem in this format. However, as cards kept on getting released, i.e. new strides, new cards added to the card pool, and just new ways to make the deck way more powerful and potent, suddenly Greydora, as a result, would become way too strong to a point where people are clamoring for it to either get errated or straight up banned. This is exactly what I mean when it comes to unbalanced card design in a traditional sense. So something even more so along the lines with something like Ripples, for example, during last year, where you knew a card was already very powerful, such as Odysseus, which already had proved in years past to be a problem. When you throw Odysseus into a deck that can generate Excel markers, and thus create this weird and unfortunate situation where you can generate 4 to 5 Excel markers in one turn, yeah, it just creates a very unfair and unhealthy environment, enough to a point where a lot of people just stopped playing premium during that time, because either they had to play that deck, MFD Turbo, which was also degenerate because of its unfair combos and interactions, or Chaos, just specifically to remove the markers, and hope and pray they can live through their initial push turn. Which 9 times out of 10 wouldn't even happen because you wouldn't even get to grade 3. So, as you can imagine, problematic card design in a broader sense is very difficult to describe. But the very gist of it is, if new cards get introduced that mesh way too well to a point where it suddenly becomes relatively difficult or straight up impossible to interact with, enough to a point where you actually have a little bit of control over it as in terms of your skill, yeah, then you're just not going to have a good time. A more very obvious example with this kind of unfair and unbalanced card design in a grander scheme of things, as in terms of recently, is Martoa Loop. Martoa Loop is referring to a combo which allows you to abuse a promo card that came out for V that is extremely splashable into a lot of Bermuda Triangle decks at the moment, where it simply has the effect to force you to draw one and call one from your hand. And they can auto-loop this effect multiple times over to a point where you're suddenly milling out of a deck. So essentially, your opponent can sit there and solitaire you to death, and that is just unfun and an unfair interaction. And similar loops like this have occurred in the past, such as with Valkyrian and Blade Master back in 2021, right as D was starting to get really kind of problematic for premium, even more so than it already was. But the point still stood that these kind of unfair interactions kind of are just not healthy for the game overall, and it's the main prime examples of what I consider to be problematic card design overall. So what realistically should be done at this point if a lot of these interactions and unfair, mechanics are being abused to a point where it pretty much makes certain decks really difficult to play against or just outright impossible to play against, in Martoa Loop's case? Well, the only simple way you can do it is just hit the cards that are necessary for a good majority of the combos, or to just remove away the unfair aspects of any given deck. So obviously you would hit something like Odysseus because, well, that card is unfair by core design when in combination with the current card pool. The only problem and caveat to this is sometimes Bushiroad tends to take a bit too long in actually being able to hit some of this stuff because, well, it's Bushiroad. There's apparently a strong disconnect, at least in my honest opinion, between the Japanese side and the English side. Now, whether or not the English side is allowed to make their own ban list at their own accord, or if they have to get approval from the Japanese side before they can actually go through with actually making a ban list, that I would love to get some clarification on, because that would at least help explain why Martoa Loop, Great Dora, and many other problematic cards have not been dealt with recently, when, let's be honest, there's been public outcry, all sorts of up and down of social media as a whole. Yeah, it's not fun, especially when there's a lot of people all up and down social media that have been clamoring and crying and hoping that Bushiroad does something about it in the long run. It's bad when Bushiroad in general can't really make a decent ban list, and yet people are telling them, hey, this is the problem, this is why X, and X reason, do something about it, and yet Bushiroad actively chooses to do nothing about it. Again, I don't know if this is because there's a strong disconnect between the Japanese side of the company versus the English side. I don't think we'll ever get an answer to that, realistically speaking, unless someone within Bushiroad, comes out and says, yes, there is this kind of problem, and that's the reason why it takes forever for us to get things going as in terms of our ban list and whatnot. But I definitely believe that when it comes to this kind of unfair interactions, in Premium in particular, I think definitely voicing our opinion out is probably the best way to go, as long as it's respectful in a way, to put it lightly. Don't go out and start cussing them out and stuff, because I've been, among many other people, have been very proactive in our overall disdain for some of the decision making that Bushiroad has made over the recent years. I mean, remember when Zarzan was legal at one point and we had to convince Bushiroad that allowing Zarzan in the format was a bad idea? Yeah, they eventually did ban the card, but it took them quite a bit to actually get around to doing that. Bushiroad should realistically be also testing a lot of these interactions to the best of their ability. Obviously, there are going to be a few things that they miss, because with almost 13 years of an entire card pool, you kind of tend to miss one or two things as a result, especially when the cards are as old as something like Weddle, when they came from one of the original extra boosters in general. So it's very obvious that if they miss something, they should be addressing it immediately. But I also do believe that we shouldn't be at the point where we're ready to raise our pitchforks at them 24/7 and harking and barking and all this other shit just to get Bushiroad's attention. You would think that Bushiroad is at least somewhat aware of some of the problems that have been occurring. But that's the point I'm trying to get at, is that I think when it comes to problematic card design in Vanguard, there has to be a lot more that is done immediately out the gate, especially in the hype of the competitive Vanguard season, when people are flying all across the world to a lot of these locations to compete, and then they suddenly lose to a deck that is straight up either unfair or uninteractable to play against. It's just not a very good feeling. I know quite a few people who've lost in top 8 and top cut because of some of these unfair decks, and it's just not fun to play against, straight up. So I definitely see a world where Bushiroad in the future should be realistically fixing some of these problems way sooner as they come up, to avoid these interactions from becoming problematic as much as it realistically has been, because I think if Bushiroad was more proactive at dealing with ban lists, I don't think there would be this much public outcry. I feel like if they said, hey, this is on our watch list, keep an eye out for when we inevitably do an emergency hit, you know, I think that would be universally better, instead of having to wait until pretty much the tail end of the competitive season for them to then do something about it, by which point the damage is already done, and you've effectively ruined a format for several months. But that is all I'm going to be saying for this video. What do you think about problematic card design in a grander scale? Do you think that I'm right on the money with some of this stuff, where you believe that Bushiroad should be doing something about it way faster than they recently have been? Or do you think there's a lot more to it than what I'm currently conveying right now? Let me know in the comment section, and until next time, this is Noah, and I will catch you guys later. Bye, everyone.